Today I'm finally beginning the restoration of my Kenwood R2000 receiver. Now, I've had this for 4 years and I made a start on it and then put it to one side, so it's a long way overdue. And what happened was I bought this second hand, it arrived, it was beautifully packed, the seller did everything he could, but it was so poorly handled in delivery that the display inside here was broken, the vacuum filled display, or VFD. So there was no way of telling if the receiver was working properly or what frequency it was listening to. So I was faced with a bit of a dilemma there, and also it's not a fully working receiver. Some of the buttons don't work. I'll show those in a minute, but what I had to do was try and figure out a way of getting the display back, and I couldn't get a spare part. It would have been easy if I could, just a solder substitute. Luckily, as well as the operation manual, I was also given a service manual, which I believe may also be available online. And I was able to look, I'll show you a diagram in a moment, and find out where the connections were. And I was able to work out that from the chip controlling the display, it may be possible for me to reconfigure the voltages with some diodes and resistors and so on, so that I could power some 7-segment LEDs. And that's what I did. It took me a few days. Eventually I got it to work. It's on a breadboard and it's still like that after 4 years, which is a shame. So there are 3 umbilical cords, if you like, coming out of the receiver. One is all the displays of the individual segments, one is all the cathodes, and one is the filament voltage, which would have been in the VFD, and this acts as a reference voltage for everything else. So after all this time, I've decided I really need to fix up this radio. And what do I have to do? The first thing I have to do is actually make a substitute display, so some sort of housing that will fit onto this receiver. I don't know how yet. I think I'll 3D print it, but I don't know what it'll look like. And I need to find a way of fitting it on so it doesn't block the S meter or the switches or anything else. So that's going to take some thinking. And then I think the whole thing needs to come apart and be cleaned and serviced. And one thing the seller told me was that this radio spent a long time in a hot and humid country, not the UK. And it also spent a long time in his loft in the UK, which, if it's anything like the lofts in the houses I've ever lived in, then it can vary from plus 40 or 50 degrees centigrade to minus 10 every year, over and over again. And you can see inside there's corrosion on all the metal parts. There's a lot of dust and filth on the boards. Who knows after 30 plus years which capacitors are okay and which aren't, and so on. So I think it needs to come completely to bits, be cleaned, anything that obviously needs changing be changed, and obviously I'll try and make the switches work. So I'll show which bits work in a minute, and I'll go from another angle and show you the LED display I made on a breadboard. And then after that I need to think again and make some notes and try and figure out what I'm going to do next and how I'm going to approach this restoration. So let's take a look at the LED display. So here's the radio on the bench in deliberately fairly dim lighting so that we can see the 7-segment LEDs which have replaced the VFD that failed in the radio. So at the moment obviously it's still on a breadboard, but let's just turn the tuning dial and hopefully you can see that the numbers are changing. And I'm picking up some CW stations on 20 meters at the moment. That's very noisy because I've just got a short antenna strung up from my garage, which is only a couple of meters off the ground, but it is picking up something. And I think the radio's working well. So let's just see if I can find a station again. There it is. Okay, so leave that running in the background for a moment. So now let's just see what works. The slow, medium and fast tuning, see that's zipping up now, they all work well, that's fine. And the AM button works, the FM button works, USB doesn't seem to work, LSB works without a light, CW works. See, that's tuning slowly now, so if I go to medium I can get back into this region and then tune until I get a station again, I hope. There's one. Anyway, never mind. All the 4 rotary controls work and the clock works. That's the time at the moment, 12:35. Anyway, I've demonstrated it works even though it's very quiet on the bands today. So my next step is to just look outside at the general state of the radio, and then to look again at my breadboard and the few notes I've made. I really can't remember all the detail of what I did 4 years ago, and I need to write all this down carefully and make some schematics so I can build something that will be like a permanent display to see what the frequency is on this radio, and then I'll come back and take another look. So back to looking at the radio, and obviously it needs some work. I'll put some pictures on the screen, but you can see inside that there's some corrosion on these metal parts. There's a lot of dust and dirt, and it all needs to come out and be cleaned. And although I've seen people do this on YouTube, I don't think I'm going to try putting it in the dishwasher or spraying it with a hose. I've seen other people do it and it's worked very well, but I'm just a bit too scared. So I'll probably clean these circuit boards with some alcohol and a brush and see what I can do about the metal corrosion. I'm not sure yet. Anyway, so once all that's out, I should be able to have a good look again inside the case and hopefully access all these buttons from the back, clean them and get them to work and make the whole radio look clean, nice and a bit fresher. And hopefully if I put it all back together, it will continue to work. And obviously while the case is empty, I have the opportunity to then try and reinstate the display if I can. And a bit earlier today I had another thought about that. Having looked at this closely now and tested the display on the breadboard, I've realized that I probably only need 7 digits altogether. The 8th one on the main display doesn't seem to be used. I wonder if that's only used when the VHF module is added to add an extra digit to the frequency. And the last one that goes in this white square is just for the memory number. So I'm now beginning to wonder if I can fit these 7 segment displays maybe even inside the radio, if not then on the outside with some sort of suitable support to try and make it look as realistic as possible. And if I use a 4, a 2 and a 1, I don't have enough hands to line these up. I may be able to just fit them in without going as far as the meter. They might just work. It's a possibility I could restore the display of this radio, and wouldn't that be great? Okay, so I had another good look in my service manual and I had another good check of my breadboard and tried to remember what I did 4 years ago to make it work. And I drew a schematic, and I'll put this on the screen now. And you can see that for the original VFD or vacuum filled device, this does actually work like a vacuum tube. It has a filament that creates free electrons in the vacuum and as a cathode. The grid for each digit switches each digit on and off when it goes positive, and it swings a lot between negative and positive. And each segment is an anode. So there are lines for each segment. They're all joined together and the whole thing flashes on and off multiple times per second, which is called multiplexing, and that gives you the illusion that the individual digits are different. But of course, this having relatively high voltages doesn't make it suitable to power a 7-segment LED, and the voltage design is reversed. So this is a common cathode, so the cathode for each digit needs to be negative or ground, and each anode needs to be positive, but they're both coming in as positive and with big swings. So in the circuit there's a transistor that switches on and off to ground each of the digits, and that's switched on or off by a positive pulse from the grid of the VFD, and that has to be considerably reduced and rectified to make sure it's appropriate. So there's a diode and a couple of resistors, and then as each digit turns on, the appropriate segments need to illuminate, and again the positive voltage for that is brought in through a diode, through a couple of resistors, and made appropriate for that. So it seems to work, and you need one transistor for each digit, and you need the same little resistor and diode setup for each segment. So I'll need to do all that onto a circuit board and hopefully fit it in on top of this. And then, as I just said a moment ago, I think I may be able to fit it all back in the case. So that's how it works. So what I'm left with now is the disassembly and to start properly restoring the radio. And I hope to document that and come back with more videos. So if you're interested, please stay tuned. I'll try and get a video going every few days, or maybe one a week, which seems to be a good idea. And I hope you'll be interested in my progress and that soon we'll be able to see a working radio with a display, tuning around the bands, zipping around the bands and getting loads of signals in to listen to, and I'll be able to use it as it was originally intended. So thanks for watching, and I'll be back soon with more videos about this project, more videos about amateur radio, electronics and other aspects of technology. See you soon.